Hello everyone. Welcome back to Buried Files. Today we return with another bone-chilling collection of authentic testimonies pulled from the deepest, most isolated corners of Appalachia. In this episode, we will venture into the heart of America's most haunted mountain range, with 8 disturbing tales of encounters with entities that should not exist, adapted from first-hand accounts of survivors who barely escaped the ancient woods alive. These are not folklore or campfire stories, but documented experiences from loggers, park rangers, researchers, and locals who have witnessed things that defy rational explanation in the shadowed hollows and forgotten trails of Appalachian territory. Each narrative comes directly from witness testimony, police reports, and missing person files that have been gathering dust in small town archives for decades. To protect the identity of those involved, some names and specific locations have been altered, but the core experiences remain untouched and unfiltered. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Buried Files for daily authentic horror content that will disturb your sleep and question everything you thought you knew about the wilderness around us. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the buried truth surfaces from the darkness. This story comes from Marcus Thompson, whose family has deep roots in the coal mining and logging communities of West Virginia. What we are about to share with you was passed down through 3 generations of his family, and Marcus only agreed to tell it after his grandfather's death in 2019, when he inherited something that would change his understanding of his family's history forever. Marcus grew up hearing whispers about his great-grandfather, Elijah Thompson, who had been a logging foreman in the 1940s in the remote mountains near the Virginia border. Elijah had built a successful operation, employing dozens of men and clearing vast sections of old growth forest for timber companies. But in 1947, the operation shut down abruptly. No explanation was ever given to the workers, and Elijah never spoke about what happened in those final months. The family only knew that he had returned home one day, pale and shaken, and announced that he was done with logging forever. For 70 years, the reason remained a mystery. Elijah took his secrets to the grave, and the old logging roads grew over with thick underbrush and saplings. The equipment was abandoned where it sat, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The only reminder of the operation was a collection of hand-drawn maps that Elijah had kept locked in a steel box in his basement. Maps that Marcus had never been allowed to see. When Marcus inherited his grandfather's house in 2019, he discovered that steel box among the belongings. Inside were dozens of detailed topographical maps of the logging operation, marked with roads, cutting zones, and equipment locations. But what caught his attention were the red X marks scattered across several maps. Some were drawn over specific areas of forest. Others marked particular roads or clearings. And written in Elijah's shaky handwriting beside many of the X marks were the words, "Do not enter," and "Forbidden ground." Marcus had always been fascinated by his family's logging history, and he saw this as an opportunity to finally understand what had happened to shut down such a profitable operation. He decided to take the maps and explore the old logging roads, thinking he might find some valuable equipment or at least get closure on the family mystery. Looking back now, he realizes that curiosity was the worst mistake of his life. On a cold October morning, Marcus loaded his ATV with camping gear and set out for the abandoned logging roads. The main access road was still partially visible, though decades of growth had narrowed it to barely more than a deer path. Following Elijah's maps, he navigated deeper into the mountains than he had ever been before. The forest here was different from the woods he knew. The trees were older, thicker, and they seemed to block out most of the daylight, even though it was mid-morning. After 2 hours of riding, Marcus reached what his great-grandfather's map indicated was the main equipment depot. Sure enough, he found the rusted remains of several logging trucks and a bulldozer, all being slowly consumed by vines and moss. The sight was both fascinating and eerie. It looked like the workers had simply walked away from their jobs one day and never returned. As Marcus explored the depot, he noticed that one of the maps in his backpack corresponded exactly to this location. And there, marked clearly in red ink, was one of the X marks with "Do Not Enter" written beside it. According to the map, there was a logging road that continued north from the depot, leading to what Elijah had marked as the Big Clearing. But this particular road had multiple red X marks along its length, and at the end, Elijah had written, "Stay away. They do not want us there." Marcus stared at the overgrown path that led north. Every instinct told him to turn around and go home. But he had come this far, and he needed to know what had frightened his great-grandfather so badly that he had abandoned a profitable business and never spoke of it again. Against his better judgment, Marcus started his ATV and headed down the forbidden road. The path was barely passable. Branches scraped against his helmet and thick undergrowth caught at his wheels. But what struck him most was the silence. In all his years of hunting and hiking in West Virginia, Marcus had never experienced such complete quiet. No bird songs, no insect buzzing, no rustling of small animals in the leaves. Even the sound of his ATV engine seemed muffled and wrong. After about a mile, the path opened into a large clearing, just as Elijah's map had indicated. But what Marcus saw there made him immediately understand why his great-grandfather had marked it as forbidden ground. The clearing was not empty. In the center stood a massive tree, easily 8 feet in diameter and taller than any tree Marcus had ever seen in West Virginia. Its bark was unnaturally dark, almost black, and its branches twisted upward in ways that seemed to defy natural growth patterns. But the tree was not what made Marcus's blood run cold. Scattered around the base of the tree were pieces of logging equipment. A chainsaw here, a hard hat there, work boots arranged in neat pairs. And hanging from the lower branches were dozens of items of clothing. Flannel shirts, work pants, leather gloves, all weather-beaten and faded but arranged with deliberate care. Marcus realized he was looking at a shrine of some kind, decorated with the belongings of loggers. As he sat on his idling ATV, trying to process what he was seeing, he noticed that some of the clothing looked familiar. His great-grandfather had described the uniforms his workers wore, and these matched the description perfectly. These were the belongings of Elijah's crew from 1947. As this realization hit him, Marcus became aware that the silence around him had changed. It was no longer just quiet. It felt expectant, like the entire forest was holding its breath and waiting for something to happen. The temperatures seemed to drop 10 degrees in a matter of seconds, and Marcus could see his breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. That was when he heard the sound. It started as a low humming, barely audible over his ATV engine. But it grew steadily louder and more complex, until Marcus realized it was not humming at all. It was singing. Multiple voices, harmonizing in a language he did not recognize, coming from somewhere deep within the forest around the clearing. Marcus knew he needed to leave immediately. He revved his ATV and spun it around, heading back toward the path. But as he reached the edge of the clearing, the singing stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, he heard something that made him freeze with terror. Footsteps. Not the light steps of deer or the scurrying of small animals. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, moving through the forest on all sides of the clearing. From his position at the edge of the clearing, Marcus could see movement in the trees. Tall figures, moving between the trunks with fluid, unnatural grace. They were keeping to the shadows, but he could make out their basic shape, They walked upright like humans, but they were too tall, too thin, and they moved in a way that suggested their joints worked differently than human joints should. One of the figures stepped partially into the light at the far edge of the clearing. What Marcus saw there convinced him that his great-grandfather had been wise to abandon his logging operation. The thing was humanoid, but clearly not human. Its skin was bark-like and dark, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Where its face should have been, there was something that looked more like the hollow of a tree trunk, dark and empty, but somehow aware. The creature raised one impossibly long arm and pointed directly at Marcus. At that gesture, the singing resumed. But now it was louder, more insistent, and it seemed to be coming from the creature itself. Other figures began to emerge from the forest, all of them tall and wrong and pointing in Marcus's direction. Marcus gunned his ATV and fled down the narrow path as fast as he dared. Behind him, the singing grew to a roar, and he could hear crashing sounds as the creatures moved through the forest, following him. Branches whipped at his face, and his ATV bounced violently over roots and rocks. But Marcus did not slow down. He could hear them behind him, moving through the trees parallel to the path, keeping pace with his machine despite the rough terrain. The pursuit continued until Marcus reached the main logging road. At that point, the sounds behind him stopped abruptly. When he finally dared to look back, he saw nothing but empty forest. But Marcus did not stop riding until he reached his truck, and he did not stop driving until he was back in town. That night, Marcus burned every one of his great-grandfather's maps. He never returned to the logging roads, and he has never spoken publicly about what he saw until now. But he did do some research into his family's history, and what he discovered confirmed his worst fears. In the local newspaper archives, Marcus found reports from 1947 about a series of disappearances among Elijah's logging crew. 7 men had vanished over the course of 2 months, all of them experienced woodsmen who knew the forest well. Search parties found no trace of them, and eventually the disappearances were attributed to the dangerous nature of logging work. But Marcus now understands what really happened to those men. Their belongings are still hanging from the branches of that ancient tree, trophies in a shrine maintained by things that do not want humans disturbing their territory. Marcus still lives in West Virginia, but he has never again ventured into the deep woods alone. And he has made sure that his own children know never to go looking for their family's abandoned logging operation. Some family secrets, he says, are meant to stay buried in the forest where they belong. This account comes from Isabella Rodriguez, a professional nature photographer who has spent the better part of her career documenting the wilderness areas of the southeastern United States. Isabella specializes in nocturnal wildlife photography, and her work has been featured in National Geographic and various conservation magazines. She is known for her meticulous planning and technical expertise, which makes what happened to her in the Tennessee mountains all the more disturbing. In September of 2021, Isabella received a commission from a prominent environmental magazine to photograph the old-growth forests of the Great Smoky Mountains for an article about conservation efforts. The assignment required her to document both the daytime beauty of these ancient forests and their nocturnal ecosystem. For Isabella, this was the kind of work she lived for. She had photographed in these mountains dozens of times before and considered herself intimately familiar with the terrain and wildlife patterns. Isabella planned a week-long expedition to capture images in some of the more remote areas of the park, places where human impact was minimal and the forest remained largely unchanged from its original state. She had obtained the necessary permits for backcountry photography and had planned her route carefully using topographical maps and GPS coordinates. Her equipment included 2 high-end digital cameras with infrared capabilities, multiple telephoto lenses, motion-activated trail cameras, and professional lighting equipment designed for wildlife photography. The first 3 days of the expedition went exactly as planned. Isabella captured stunning images of black bears, various bird species, and the intricate details of the forest ecosystem. Her nighttime photography sessions yielded particularly impressive results, with her infrared equipment revealing the hidden activities of nocturnal animals. By the 4th day, she had more than enough material for the magazine article. But she decided to venture deeper into the mountains to explore an area she had never photographed before. Using her GPS unit, Isabella hiked to a remote valley that was marked on her maps as containing some of the oldest trees in the entire mountain range. The area was accessible only by an unmarked trail that required several hours of difficult hiking through dense forest. When she finally reached the valley floor, Isabella was amazed by what she found. The trees here were massive, some easily over 400 years old, and they formed a canopy so thick that even in the middle of the day, the forest floor remained in deep twilight. Isabella set up her base camp in a small clearing near a stream and spent the remainder of the day scouting locations for her nighttime photography session. She noticed immediately that this part of the forest was unusually quiet. Even during the day, she heard very few bird calls or sounds of small animals moving through the undergrowth. The silence was so complete that it felt almost oppressive. But Isabella attributed this to the depth of the forest and the thickness of the canopy overhead. As evening approached, Isabella prepared her equipment for what she hoped would be the highlight of her expedition. She positioned her cameras at strategic locations throughout the valley, set up motion-activated trail cameras to capture any wildlife activity, and prepared her main camera with infrared filters for detailed nocturnal photography. The moon was nearly full that night, which would provide excellent natural lighting for her work. Around midnight, Isabella began her photography session in earnest. She was using a technique she had perfected over years of wildlife photography, moving silently through the forest and using her infrared-capable camera to capture images without disturbing the natural behavior of nocturnal animals. For the first hour, everything proceeded normally. She captured several excellent shots of owls, a family of raccoons, and various insects that were active in the darkness. But as she moved deeper into the valley, Isabella began to notice something strange about her camera's behavior. The digital display was flickering intermittently, and occasionally the camera would take pictures on its own, even when she was not pressing the shutter button. At first, she assumed this was a technical malfunction caused by the humidity or temperature changes in the deep forest. But when she reviewed the images on her camera's LCD screen, what she saw made her question her understanding of both her equipment and the forest around her. The camera had been taking pictures of areas where Isabella was certain no animals were present. But in these images, captured with infrared technology that could see heat signatures invisible to the human eye, there were figures, tall, humanoid shapes standing among the trees, sometimes just at the edge of the frame, sometimes directly in the center of the composition. The figures appeared to be generating no heat whatsoever. They showed up in the infrared images as completely black silhouettes, cold spots in an otherwise warm forest environment. Isabella initially convinced herself that these were technical glitches or artifacts caused by her equipment malfunctioning. But as she continued her photography session, the autonomous picture-taking became more frequent, and the figures in the images became more numerous and more clearly defined. In one particularly disturbing image, she counted 7 distinct figures arranged in a rough circle around a massive oak tree. In another, a tall figure appeared to be standing directly behind her previous position, as if it had been following her movements through the forest. The most unsettling aspect of these images was that the figures appeared to be aware of the camera. In several shots, they seemed to be looking directly at the lens, their dark forms oriented toward Isabella's position. And in the most recent images, they appeared to be moving closer, gradually closing the distance between themselves and her location. As Isabella reviewed these disturbing photographs, she became aware that the forest around her had changed. The already profound silence had deepened to an almost unnatural degree. No insects buzzed, no leaves rustled in the breeze, no night birds called. It was as if every living thing in the valley had suddenly ceased all activity. Even more disturbing, the temperature seemed to have dropped significantly. Isabella could see her breath in the frigid air, despite the fact that it had been a warm September evening when she began her photography session. Isabella decided to return to her base camp immediately. But as she began to pack her equipment, her camera started taking pictures again, this time in rapid succession. The shutter fired continuously for nearly 30 seconds, capturing dozens of images before finally stopping. When Isabella reviewed these new photographs, what she saw convinced her that she needed to leave the valley immediately. The images showed the same dark figures, but now they were much closer and much more numerous. In the final photograph of the sequence, one of the figures appeared to be standing less than 10 feet from her position. The figure was extraordinarily tall, at least 8 feet in height, and impossibly thin. Where its face should have been, there was only a dark void that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Isabella gathered her equipment as quickly as possible and began hiking back toward the main trail, using her flashlight to navigate through the dark forest. But as she moved through the trees, her camera continued to malfunction, taking random pictures and displaying error messages she had never seen before. Against her better judgment, Isabella continued to check these new images, and what she saw terrified her beyond rational thought. The photographs now showed multiple figures moving through the forest around her. They appeared to be keeping pace with her movements, staying just outside the range of her flashlight, but clearly visible in the infrared spectrum of her camera. In some images, they seemed to be moving through the trees themselves, their dark forms passing through solid wood, as if it were empty air. In others, they appeared to be moving along the ground in ways that defied normal locomotion, flowing rather than walking. Most disturbing of all, the figures seemed to be communicating with each other. In several consecutive images, Isabella could see them positioned at various points around her location, their forms oriented toward each other as if they were coordinating some kind of action. And in the most recent photographs, they had begun to close in, forming an ever-tightening circle around her path through the forest. Isabella abandoned any attempt at stealth and began running through the forest as fast as she dared in the darkness. Behind her, she could hear sounds that did not match any known wildlife. Not footsteps, but a sound like wind moving through branches. Except there was no wind. The sound seemed to be coming from multiple directions simultaneously, and it was following her movements through the forest. As Isabella ran, her camera continued its autonomous photography, and the images became increasingly disturbing. The figures were now clearly pursuing her, moving through the forest with impossible speed and grace. In one image, a figure appeared to be suspended in midair between two trees. In another, multiple figures seemed to be emerging from the ground itself, their dark forms rising from the forest floor like shadows given substance. Isabella finally reached the main trail and did not stop running until she reached her vehicle. Only when she was safely inside with the doors locked did she dare to review the final images her camera had captured. The last photograph showed the edge of the forest where the trail began. Standing just inside the tree line, barely visible in the infrared spectrum, were dozens of the dark figures. They appeared to be watching her, but they had not followed her beyond the boundary of the deep forest. Isabella drove directly home and has never returned to that remote valley. She submitted her assignment to the magazine using only the photographs from her first 3 days in the mountains. She has never shown the disturbing images from her final night to anyone. And she has never spoken publicly about what her camera captured in that ancient forest. But Isabella did conduct extensive research into the history of the area where she had her encounter. What she discovered was that the remote valley had a long history of unexplained disappearances and strange sightings dating back to the earliest European settlements in the region. Local Cherokee traditions spoke of that particular valley as a place where the boundary between the physical world and the spirit world was thin. A place where ancient guardians still protected the oldest parts of the forest from human intrusion. Isabella no longer does solo photography expeditions in remote wilderness areas. When asked why, she simply says that some places are not meant to be documented, and some subjects are better left unphotographed. This account comes from the personnel files of the North Carolina State Park Service and was shared with us by retired park supervisor William Hayes, who worked alongside Ranger Dakota Williams for over 8 years before the incident that ended Dakota's career and changed the lives of everyone who knew her. What we are about to share with you are the actual radio transcripts from Dakota's final patrol, along with testimony from the search and rescue teams who went looking for her when she failed to return. Dakota Williams had been a park ranger at Grandfather Mountain State Park for nearly a decade. She was known among her colleagues as one of the most competent and reliable rangers in the entire North Carolina system. Dakota was an experienced wilderness tracker, a certified emergency medical technician, and had completed advanced training in search and rescue operations. She was the kind of ranger who was sent on the most difficult assignments because her supervisors knew she could handle any situation the mountains might present. In October of 2020, the Park Service received reports from several hikers about unusual sounds coming from the remote northwestern section of the park, an area known as Dead Man's Hollow. The reports described screaming sounds that did not match any known wildlife, as well as sightings of large shapes moving through the forest at night. Park management initially dismissed these reports as typical misidentifications of common animals. But when similar reports continued to come in over a period of several weeks, they decided to send a ranger to investigate. Dakota volunteered for the assignment. She was familiar with Dead Man's Hollow, having patrolled the area many times over the years, and she was confident that she could quickly determine the source of the disturbances and put the hikers' concerns to rest. The plan was simple. Dakota would hike into the hollow on a Friday afternoon, establish a base camp, and spend the weekend conducting systematic patrols to identify any unusual animal activity or signs of human interference in the area. Dakota's radio was equipped with a digital recording system that automatically logged all transmissions for training and safety purposes. This recording system would later provide the only evidence of what happened to her during those 3 days in Dead Man's Hollow. What follows are the exact transcripts of her radio communications, along with timestamps and notes from Park Dispatch. Friday, October 16th, 2024, 32 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, this is Ranger Williams. I'm approaching the trailhead for Dead Man's Hollow. Weather conditions are clear, temperature is approximately 65 degrees. I'm carrying full camping gear for a 3-day patrol. Estimated arrival at base camp location is 1600 hours. 1615 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, Williams here. I've established base camp at grid coordinates 36.1197 north, 81.8754 west. The hollow is quieter than usual. No bird activity, very little insect noise. Could be seasonal, but it's unusual for this time of year. Beginning initial patrol of the area now. 1945 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, this is Williams. Completed first patrol sweep of the hollow. No signs of unusual animal activity, no evidence of human interference. Found several deer tracks and scat, but nothing out of the ordinary. I did notice that the wildlife seems to be avoiding the deeper parts of the hollow. All tracks I found were along the edges, near the main trail. We'll investigate further tomorrow. Saturday, October 17th, 2020. 7:30 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, Williams checking in. Had a quiet night, though I did hear some sounds around 3 a.m. that I could not identify. Sounded like vocalizations, but not from any animal I recognize. Could have been wind through the rock formations. Beginning extended patrol of the hollow's interior sections. 11:22 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, this is Williams. I'm about 2 miles into the hollow, following the creek bed. I found something unusual. There's a circle of trees here, all the same species, arranged in what appears to be a perfect ring. The trees are old growth, probably 200 years or more, but they're arranged too precisely to be natural. The ground inside the circle is completely bare. No vegetation, no leaf litter, nothing. Soil appears to have been disturbed recently, but I can't determine by what. 14:17 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, Williams here. I've been investigating the tree circle for the past few hours. Found several items buried in the soil, old camping equipment, pieces of clothing, what looks like personal belongings. Some of it appears to be decades old, but some looks recent. I'm going to collect samples and continue my investigation. The area has an unusual feel to it. Hard to explain. We'll report more detailed findings this evening. 21:33 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, this is Williams. Something is not right here. I returned to my base camp about an hour ago and found that my equipment had been moved. Food containers were opened and emptied, but not by animals. Too neat, too deliberate. Tent was repositioned, but not damaged. Someone or something went through my camp while I was away. I'm going to maintain radio contact throughout the night and will request backup if necessary. Sunday, October 18th, 2020 02, 17 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, Williams here. I need backup immediately. There are sounds surrounding my position. Not animal sounds. Sounds like voices, but distorted. Multiple voices, coming from different directions. They seem to be communicating with each other. I can see movement in the trees around my camp. Large shapes, too big to be deer or bear. Request immediate assistance. 2:23 hours. Base to Ranger Williams. Williams, this is base. We're dispatching a team to your location. Estimated arrival time is 5 a.m. hours. Maintain your position and stay on the radio. Can you describe what you're seeing? 2:25 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, the shapes are getting closer. They're moving through the trees, but not like animals. They seem to be flowing. That's the only way I can describe it. And the voices are getting louder. They're not speaking any language I recognize, but it sounds like they're negotiating something, discussing something. 2:31 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, they're at the edge of my camp now. I can see them clearly. They're tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, but thin, too thin. Their limbs are wrong, too long, joints in the wrong places. They're surrounding my position, but they haven't approached directly. It's like they're waiting for something. 2:35 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, one of them is approaching my tent. It's making gestures with its arms, pointing toward the tree circle I found earlier. I think they want me to go there. The voices have stopped. They're all just standing there, waiting, watching me. 0241 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, I'm going to try to move toward the main trail. They're not blocking that direction. Maybe I can reach the backup team before... Wait, the one nearest to me just moved. It's positioning itself between me and the trail exit. They don't want me to leave. 247 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, they're communicating again. The sounds are coming from them directly now, not from the forest. It's like they're singing, but in harmonies that don't make sense. Too many voices for the number of figures I can see. And base, the temperature just dropped dramatically. I can see my breath. It was 60 degrees when I made camp. 252 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, they're moving again. All of them at the same time, in the same direction. Toward the tree circle. They're gesturing for me to follow them. I don't think I have a choice here. They're not threatening me directly. But they're making it clear that I need to go with them. 303 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, I'm following them to the tree circle. I don't know what else to do. The backup team needs to know that this is not a normal search and rescue situation. These are not animals, and they're not human. They seem to have intelligence, purpose. They're leading me somewhere specific. 315 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, we've reached the tree circle. They've arranged themselves around the perimeter, all facing inward. There's something in the center now, something that wasn't there before. It looks like an opening in the ground. Not a cave, not a hole. An opening. The edges are too smooth, too perfect. They're indicating that I should approach it. 321 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, I can see down into the opening now. There's light coming from below, but not electric light. Something else. And I can hear sounds from down there. Voices, but human voices this time. People talking, but I can't make out the words. Base, I think there are people down there. People who have been missing. 324 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, they want me to go down there. Into the opening. I can see what looks like steps carved into the sides, leading down. The voices from below are getting louder. Someone down there is calling for help. I have to go help them. That's my job. 327 hours. Ranger Williams to base. Base, I'm going down. If you don't hear from me again, tell my family that I was doing my job. Tell them that I found something in Dead Man's Hollow that explains all the missing hikers over the years. Tell them that Transmission ends. The backup team reached Dakota's campsite at 0515 hours on Sunday morning. They found her equipment scattered around the campsite, but no sign of Dakota herself. A thorough search of Dead Man's Hollow revealed no trace of the tree circle Dakota had described, no opening in the ground, and no explanation for her disappearance. The official Park Service report concluded that Ranger Dakota Williams had suffered some kind of psychological break during her solo patrol and had wandered off into the wilderness in a confused state. The strange radio transmissions were attributed to stress-induced hallucinations. But the search teams found one piece of evidence that was not included in the official report. Dakota's radio, discovered nearly a mile from her campsite, had continued recording for several hours after her final transmission. The additional recordings contained only silence, except for one brief moment at 0633 hours. For exactly 30 seconds, the radio picked up what sounded like Dakota's voice, calling for help from somewhere deep underground. Dakota Williams was never found. The northwestern section of Grandfather Mountain State Park was quietly closed to public access, and no park rangers have been assigned to patrol Dead Man's Hollow since October of 2020. This story comes from Ethan Kowalski, an experienced mushroom forager and wilderness enthusiast from Pennsylvania. He shared an account of his unsettling experience while hunting for rare mushrooms in the remote Appalachian forests near the border of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Ethan, respected in the local mycology community for his knowledge and caution, assures us the events he describes are real and remain a mystery to this day. Ethan had been searching for mushrooms since his teenage years. Over the last decade, his expertise had grown considerably, especially when it came to the elusive and fragrant morel mushrooms that flourished in the spring and early summer months across the Appalachian region. The forests surrounding the border of Pennsylvania and West Virginia were known among foragers for their rich variety of fungi. Ethan had explored many areas, but there was one patch of particularly dense forest near a small river valley where he had heard stories of extraordinary finds and unexplained disappearances. In June of 2022, Ethan set out early in the morning, eager to explore this specific valley, which was locally known as Black River Hollow. Ethan had never been inside Black River Hollow before, but had always been curious due to local warnings about the area. For years, he had heard rumors about people entering the valley in search of mushrooms and never being seen again. Still, his passion for fungi and his respect for nature drove him to explore this enigmatic forest. Ethan told us he was cautious throughout his journey, bringing along standard safety gear, a GPS unit, first aid supplies, and a reliable cell phone with satellite communication capabilities. He followed a narrow trail that wound through the trees and eventually diverged toward the river valley. The sounds of flowing water were faint but constant up ahead. After a 2-hour hike, he reached the bottom of the valley where the forest seemed to thicken and the canopy grew darker. The air was damp and heavy, with the earthy smell of moss, rotting wood, and growing mushrooms. It was here that Ethan began his search, carefully inspecting the forest floor for the distinctive appearance of morel mushrooms and other edible varieties. What caught Ethan's attention almost immediately was the presence of an unusually perfect circle of fairy ring mushrooms. Fairy rings are a natural phenomenon caused by certain types of fungi that grow in circular patterns due to their underground network of mycelium expanding outward uniformly. But the circle Ethan encountered was unlike any he had ever seen. The mushrooms were unusually large and glowing faintly with a pale blue light. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, Ethan circled around the fairy ring, noting that the center of the circle was disturbingly bare of vegetation, as if the fungal activity had sterilized the soil. Curious about the origins, he decided to step inside the ring, hoping to find some clues. No sooner had he stepped into the circle than Ethan felt a sudden chill sweep through the valley. The usual sounds of the forest, bird calls, rustling leaves, insect buzz, seemed to pause. The mood shifted from peaceful to tense, and Ethan immediately became aware of a subtle but unmistakable presence watching him. Ethan tried to dismiss the feeling as paranoia, focusing instead on the task of collecting mushroom specimens. He took extensive notes and photos to document the fairy ring and the other fungi around it. But as he moved further into the circle, he noticed something strange. The trees seemed to lean inward, bending slightly toward the fairy ring, and the shadows beneath the canopy deepened unnaturally. As he ventured deeper, Ethan spotted something on the ground ahead. At first, he thought it was a shadow, but as he approached, he realized it was a cluster of worn leather shoes arranged neatly in a circle, an eerie echo of the fungal ring above. Around the shoes were bones, animal bones at least. but some looked strangely gnawed on, as if by creatures that were neither ordinary forest scavengers nor humans. The uneasiness grew stronger, and Ethan decided to take a moment to rest. As he sat on a nearby fallen log, he reflected on the local stories he had heard growing up. Stories of forest spirits guarding the more sacred parts of the wilderness, punishing those who disturbed their domain. Many forbade entering the heart of Black River Hollow, warning that the forest would consume those who ignored the warnings. Suddenly, Ethan felt a sharp movement nearby. He looked up just in time to see a dark shape darting between the trees. It was tall and slender, moving with an unnatural grace, and it appeared to be watching him. Ethan raised his camera, hoping to capture the figure, but as he adjusted his lens, the creature vanished without a trace. Unsettled but driven by a mix of curiosity and caution, Ethan packed up his specimens and began to exit the valley. However, as he followed the path back toward the trailhead, he realized the forest seemed to have changed. The landmarks he had noted on the way in appeared slightly different. The angle of a tree, the position of a rock, making him question whether he was truly retracing his steps. His GPS signal flickered and temporarily went out. The device rebooted, but showed him far off course. Ethan struggled to maintain his nerves, knowing that panicking would only make it harder to find his way home. Just when he feared he would become lost in the valley, a faint glowing light appeared ahead, softly illuminating the forest floor. It was the same pale blue light as the mushrooms in the fairy ring, and it seemed to be beckoning him forward. Drawn by the light, Ethan approached an ancient tree at the edge of the valley. The tree was covered in the same glowing mushrooms, arranged in a pattern almost like a symbol. At the base of the tree, he saw a small, hand-carved wooden box partially buried in the soil. Ethan opened the box carefully and found inside several old artifacts: a rusted pocket watch, a cracked leather-bound journal, and a collection of faded photographs. The journal belonged to a man named Jonathan Weaver, a mushroom hunter who had reportedly disappeared in Black River Hollow decades earlier. The photographs depicted Weaver and his family posing near the same valley where Ethan now stood. Reading the journal entries, Ethan discovered that Weaver had documented strange occurrences similar to his own experience. The eerie fairy rings, the unnatural silence, the appearance of shadowy figures moving through the forest. Weaver's final entry ended abruptly, mentioning a desire to protect the sacred forest, followed by a warning to all who might follow. Do not cross the circle. Do not disturb what guards these woods. As Ethan closed the journal, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, and the glowing mushrooms flickered before going dark. The forest around him seemed to exhale, releasing its tension, and the usual sounds of the woods gradually returned. Following the fading blue light back to the main trail, Ethan managed to find his way out of Black River Hollow before darkness fell. He made his way back to the trailhead and reported his findings to his local mycology club and the forest ranger station. Though some were skeptical, many acknowledged the historical disappearances and strange folklore associated with Black River Hollow. But Ethan's experience did not end when he left the forest. Over the following weeks, he noticed something disturbing about the mushroom specimens he had collected from inside the fairy ring. Despite being stored in proper conditions, they continued to glow with that same pale blue light, growing brighter each night. The glow was so intense that Ethan had to store them in a sealed container in his basement to prevent the eerie light from disturbing his sleep. Even more unsettling, Ethan began to experience vivid dreams about Black River Hollow. In these dreams, he would find himself back in the forest, standing inside the fairy ring, while shadowy figures moved through the trees around him. The figures never approached directly, but they seemed to be waiting for something, watching him with an intelligence that felt ancient and patient. After 3 weeks of these disturbing dreams and the continuously glowing specimens, Ethan made a decision. He returned to Black River Hollow, carrying the collected mushrooms in a sealed container. When he reached the location where he had found the fairy ring, he was not surprised to discover that the circle was still there, still glowing with that unnatural blue light. Ethan carefully placed the specimens back where he had found them, arranging them according to the pattern he remembered. As soon as the last mushroom was returned to its original position, the glowing intensified briefly, then faded to the same level he had first observed. The oppressive feeling that had haunted him for weeks immediately lifted, and the forest around him seemed to return to its natural state. The dream stopped that night, and Ethan never experienced any further supernatural occurrences related to his time in Black River Hollow. But the experience left him with a profound respect for the boundaries that exist in the deep wilderness. Boundaries that are not marked by signs or fences, but by forces far older and more powerful than human understanding. To this day, Ethan Kowalski advises caution to anyone interested in exploring the deeper valleys of the Appalachian forests. He warns that some areas are protected not by government decree, but by forces and guardians unknown to most, and that disturbing their domain comes at a cost that few can survive. He has never returned to Black River Hollow, and he never will. The legend of the glowing fairy rings and the mysterious guardian watching over Black River Hollow remains part of local folklore. But Ethan's detailed account serves as a chilling reminder that some parts of the forest still hold secrets far beyond the understanding of even the most experienced mushroom hunters. Some territories, he learned, belong to entities that have been protecting them far longer than humans have walked these mountains, and they do not appreciate intrusions from the outside world. This story comes from Zoe Baptiste, a seasoned search and rescue volunteer based in Virginia who has dedicated over a decade of her life to helping locate missing persons in the Appalachian wilderness. What she experienced during one particular case in 2023 challenged everything she thought she knew about the forests she had spent years navigating. And it remains the most disturbing search mission of her entire career. Zoe had been volunteering with the Virginia Search and Rescue Team for nearly 10 years, specializing in wilderness recovery missions and lost person searches. Her experience included everything from finding disoriented day hikers to recovering bodies in treacherous terrain. She was known among her colleagues for her methodical approach, her ability to remain calm under pressure, and her impressive success rate in locating missing persons. In late October of 2023, Zoe received an urgent call about a group of 5 experienced hikers who had failed to return from a multi-day trek in a remote area of the Blue Ridge Mountains known as Blackwood Ridge. The group consisted of seasoned outdoors enthusiasts, all with extensive Appalachian hiking experience and proper equipment for extended backcountry expeditions. They had been overdue for 3 days when the search was initiated. The missing hikers were led by David Chen, a wilderness survival instructor and experienced guide who had been exploring Appalachian trails for over 15 years. The other members of the group were Sarah Mitchell, a geology professor from Virginia Tech, Marcus Thompson, an outdoor photographer, Jennifer Walsh, a park ranger from Shenandoah National Park, and Robert Kim, a medical student who regularly participated in wilderness first aid training. This was not a group of inexperienced weekend warriors. These were people who understood the risks of backcountry hiking and knew how to handle emergency situations. The last communication from the group had come 4 days earlier, when David Chen sent a brief message via satellite communicator to his emergency contact. The message was unusually cryptic for someone as methodical as Chen. It simply read, "Route changed. Found something unexpected. Cave system not on maps. Will update tomorrow." No further communications were received. When the search and rescue team assembled at the staging area near Blackwood Ridge, Zoe was assigned to lead one of 3 teams tasked with covering different sections of the suspected search area. Based on the hikers' original itinerary and the location of Chen's final satellite transmission, the search teams focused on a particularly remote section of the ridge that was rarely visited by casual hikers. Blackwood Ridge was notorious among local search and rescue personnel for its difficult terrain, dense forest coverage, and extensive cave systems that were not fully mapped or documented. The area had a history of missing person cases dating back decades, and local folklore spoke of the ridge as a place where people simply vanished without explanation. But Zoe had always attributed such stories to the natural dangers of the wilderness rather than any supernatural causes. On the second day of the search, Zoe's team discovered the first evidence of the missing hikers near an abandoned trailhead that was not part of their original planned route. Scattered around the area were several pieces of equipment that clearly belonged to the missing group. A distinctive blue backpack that matched David Chen's gear, a water bottle with Sarah Mitchell's university sticker, and a pair of expensive hiking boots that fit the description of equipment carried by Marcus Thompson. The discovery of these abandoned items was troubling for several reasons. The equipment had been left in an organized manner, not scattered as if dropped during a panic or emergency. The items were also undamaged and showed no signs of animal interference, despite being exposed to the elements for several days. Most disturbing of all, the equipment included essential survival gear that no experienced hiker would willingly abandon, including water purification tablets, emergency shelter materials, and first aid supplies. Among the abandoned items, Zoe's team found something that would prove crucial to understanding what had happened to the missing hikers. Tucked inside David Chen's backpack was a small waterproof notebook that he used to document his hiking experiences. The final entries in this journal provided the first clues about the group's fate and the discovery that had apparently led them away from their planned route. According to Chen's journal entries, the group had been following their intended trail when Sarah Mitchell, the geologist, noticed unusual rock formations that suggested the presence of a cave system in an area where no caves were documented on any official maps. Intrigued by the geological anomaly and Chen's natural curiosity about unexplored wilderness areas, the group decided to investigate. The journal described the discovery of a cave entrance that was partially concealed by fallen trees and thick vegetation, almost as if nature itself was trying to hide the opening. Chen noted that the cave mouth was larger than typical limestone formations in the area, and that strange symbols or markings were visible on the rock face near the entrance. He described these symbols as looking ancient and deliberately carved, but not matching any known Native American petroglyphs. What made Chen's journal entries particularly unsettling was his description of the group's emotional response to the cave discovery. He wrote that all 5 members of the group felt an immediate and inexplicable sense of unease when they approached the cave entrance. Despite their extensive wilderness experience, every member of the group reported feeling watched and experiencing an overwhelming urge to leave the area immediately. However, Chen's final journal entry indicated that the group had decided to explore the cave despite their reservations. He wrote, "We all feel something is wrong here, but we can't explain what. Sarah thinks the geological formations inside might be significant. We're going to do a preliminary exploration and then continue on our planned route tomorrow. If anything happens to us, we entered the cave at coordinates 38.2456 north, 78.8834 west." Using these coordinates, Zoe's team was able to locate the cave that Chen had described. The entrance was indeed partially hidden by vegetation and fallen trees, and it would have been easy to miss if they had not been specifically searching for it. As they approached the cave mouth, Zoe experienced the same sense of unease that Chen had described in his journal. Every member of her search team reported feeling uncomfortable and on edge, despite their professional training and experience with cave searches. The cave entrance was larger than typical formations in the area, and the rock face did indeed bear strange markings that appeared to be deliberately carved. The symbols were unlike anything Zoe had seen before, consisting of intersecting lines and circular patterns that seemed to follow some kind of systematic design. But there was no time to analyze the symbols in detail. The priority was locating the missing hikers. Equipped with professional cave rescue gear, headlamps, safety ropes, and emergency communications equipment, Zoe's team entered the cave system. The interior was immediately different from other caves in the region. The passages were wider and more uniform than natural limestone formations typically produced, and the air was noticeably colder than the mild October weather outside. As they moved deeper into the cave, the team found clear evidence that the missing hikers had been there recently. Footprints in the cave floor matched the boot patterns of the missing group, and they discovered several more pieces of equipment, including flashlights, a camping stove, and additional clothing items. But these items were arranged in a way that seemed deliberate rather than accidentally dropped. In one chamber, approximately 200 feet from the cave entrance, Zoe's team made a discovery that convinced them they were on the right track, but also deepened the mystery of what had happened to the hikers. Personal effects belonging to each of the 5 missing hikers had been carefully arranged in a circle in the center of the chamber. David Chen's satellite communicator, Sarah Mitchell's geological sampling tools, Marcus Thompson's camera equipment, Jennifer Walsh's park ranger badge, and Robert Kim's medical supplies were all present and accounted for. But the arrangement of these items was what made the discovery so unsettling. They had not been carelessly dropped or scattered as might be expected if the hikers had encountered an emergency. Instead, they were positioned with obvious deliberation, as if they had been placed there as part of some kind of ritual or offering. And despite the fact that the items included valuable and essential equipment, there was no sign of the hikers themselves. As Zoe's team investigated the chamber, they began to notice other disturbing aspects of the cave environment. Strange sounds echoed through the passages, sounds that could not be explained by normal cave acoustics or the presence of bats or other cave-dwelling animals. They heard what sounded like whispers in the distance, footsteps that seemed to move parallel to their own movements, and occasional thuds or impacts that reverberated through the rock walls. The cave system itself seemed to defy logical exploration. Passages that appeared to lead deeper into the mountain would suddenly end in solid walls, while other tunnels seemed to loop back on themselves in ways that violated basic principles of cave formation. Zoe's team used standard cave mapping techniques to keep track of their progress, but their compass readings were inconsistent, and their GPS units provided contradictory location data. Most disturbing of all was the growing sense that they were being watched by something in the cave. Multiple team members reported seeing movement in their peripheral vision, shadowy figures that would disappear when observed directly. At one point, Zoe herself saw what appeared to be a tall, humanoid figure standing in a passage ahead of them. But when she directed her headlamp toward the location, nothing was there. After 6 hours of searching the cave system, Zoe's team had covered what they estimated to be over a mile of passages and chambers, but they had found no trace of the missing hikers beyond their abandoned personal effects. The cave seemed to extend much farther into the mountain than geological surveys had indicated, and several passages led to areas that were not accessible without specialized climbing equipment. As the team prepared to exit the cave and call for additional resources, They experienced what Zoe later described as the most terrifying moment of her search and rescue career. As they moved back toward the cave entrance, following the route they had mapped on their way in, they discovered that passages they had previously explored were no longer there. Tunnels that had been clearly marked on their cave map seemed to have vanished, replaced by solid rock walls. The team found themselves disoriented and temporarily lost in a cave system that should have been familiar to them. Their carefully maintained route markers had disappeared, and their compass readings were now completely unreliable. For nearly 2 hours, they searched for the exit, growing increasingly concerned that they might become trapped in the same mysterious circumstances that had apparently claimed the missing hikers. Eventually, the team managed to locate the cave entrance by following air currents and the faint sound of wind moving through the passage. But as they emerged from the cave, they realized that several hours had passed beyond what their exploration should have required. According to their watches, they had been in the cave for over 10 hours, but their detailed logs accounted for only 6 hours of actual search time. The search for the missing hikers continued for another 5 days, with additional teams exploring different sections of Blackwood Ridge and specialized cave rescue units investigating every accessible cave system in the area. But no further trace of David Chen, Sarah Mitchell, Marcus Thompson, Jennifer Walsh, or Robert Kim was ever found. The search was eventually suspended when it became clear that the resources being expended were not producing results. The official search and rescue report concluded that the 5 hikers had likely become lost in the unmapped cave system and had succumbed to exposure or injury in passages that were too dangerous or inaccessible for rescue teams to reach. The abandoned personal effects were attributed to the hikers' attempts to lighten their loads during an emergency evacuation of the cave. But Zoe knew that the official explanation did not account for many of the disturbing details of the case. The deliberate arrangement of the personal effects, the impossible cave geography, the time discrepancies, and the overwhelming sense of being watched by something intelligent and malevolent were not mentioned in the official report. In the months following the search, Zoe conducted her own research into the history of Blackwood Ridge and discovered that the missing hikers case was not an isolated incident. Records dating back to the early 1800s documented similar disappearances in the same area, always involving small groups of people who had discovered cave systems that were not shown on any maps. Local Cherokee oral traditions spoke of the ridge as a place where the boundary between the physical world and the spirit world was thin, a place where ancient guardians still protected sacred sites from intrusion. Zoe has never returned to Blackwood Ridge, and she advises other search and rescue personnel to exercise extreme caution when conducting operations in the area. She believes that some places in the deep wilderness are protected by forces that operate beyond human understanding, and that certain discoveries are meant to remain hidden. The case of the 5 missing hikers remains officially unsolved, but Zoe's detailed account provides a chilling reminder that the Appalachian wilderness still holds secrets that can claim the lives of even the most experienced and prepared outdoors enthusiasts. The cave where David Chen and his companions made their final exploration has never been relocated, despite multiple attempts by both official search teams and independent investigators. This story comes from Tyler Nakamura, an experienced mountaineer from Kentucky who has spent over a decade challenging himself on some of the most difficult rock faces in the southeastern United States. Tyler's account describes an incident that occurred during what should have been a routine technical climb in the summer of 2023, but which became something far more terrifying than any physical challenge he had ever faced. Tyler had been climbing since he was 16 years old, starting with local crags near his hometown of Lexington, before gradually working his way up to more challenging routes throughout the Appalachian region. By 2023, He was considered an expert climber with extensive experience in technical rock climbing, mountaineering, and rescue techniques. He was known in the climbing community for his meticulous preparation, his respect for safety protocols, and his deep appreciation for the natural environment of the mountains. In late July of 2023, Tyler planned an ambitious climbing expedition to a remote area of the Cumberland Plateau, known for its challenging and largely unexplored rock formations. His target was a technical route on a cliff face that locals called Devil's Backbone, a name that Tyler had always assumed referred to the jagged appearance of the rock formation when viewed from a distance. Tyler's climbing partner for this expedition was Michael Alvarez, a trusted friend and fellow climber who had accompanied Tyler on dozens of previous adventures. Michael was equally experienced and shared Tyler's commitment to safety and environmental stewardship. Together, they had successfully completed some of the most challenging climbs in Kentucky, West Virginia, and North Carolina. The planning for the Devil's Backbone climb had taken several months. Tyler and Michael studied topographical maps, reviewed weather patterns, and consulted with local climbing guides to understand the unique challenges presented by this particular route. The cliff face was known for its technical difficulty, featuring overhangs, narrow ledges, and rock that required specialized protection techniques. On the morning of July 28, 2023, Tyler and Michael began their approach to the base of Devil's Backbone under ideal conditions. The weather was clear and warm, with light winds and excellent visibility. They carried comprehensive climbing gear, including dynamic ropes, a full rack of protection devices, harnesses, helmets, and emergency equipment. Their plan was to complete the climb in a single day, but they also carried bivouac gear in case weather or other circumstances required an overnight stay on the mountain. The initial stages of the climb proceeded exactly as Tyler and Michael had anticipated. The rock was solid and provided good holds, and their protection placements were secure and reliable. Both climbers felt confident and comfortable as they worked their way up the lower sections of the route, following a line of weakness in the rock that would eventually lead them to the summit ridge. Around midday, Tyler and Michael reached a challenging section of the climb that required them to navigate a significant overhang. Tyler was leading this pitch, carefully placing protection devices and testing each hold before committing his full weight. It was while he was securing a particularly critical anchor point that the first signs of trouble began to manifest. Michael, who was belaying Tyler from a ledge about 40 feet below, suddenly felt a strange vibration running through the rock face. The sensation was subtle at first, almost like the distant rumble of heavy machinery, but it quickly intensified into a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emanate from deep within the mountain itself. Michael called up to Tyler to ask if he was experiencing the same phenomenon, and Tyler confirmed that he could feel the vibrations as well. Initially, both climbers assumed that the vibrations were caused by some kind of geological activity, perhaps minor seismic tremors or the settling of rock formations. Such phenomena were not uncommon in mountainous regions, and neither Tyler nor Michael was immediately concerned. But as the vibrations continued to intensify, they were accompanied by a low humming sound that seemed to resonate through the entire cliff face. Tyler described the sound as unlike anything he had ever heard in the mountains. It was not the wind moving through rock formations, nor was it the sound of water flowing through underground passages. Instead, it was a deliberate, almost musical tone that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the vibrations they could feel through the rock. The sound gradually grew louder and more complex, until it resembled a chorus of voices harmonizing in frequencies that were almost below the range of human hearing. As Tyler worked to complete his anchor placement and continue up the overhang, he noticed that his climbing equipment was beginning to behave in ways that defied explanation. His rope, which had been inspected that morning and was in perfect condition, began to develop frays and tangles even though it was not in contact with any sharp edges. The carabiners that connected his protection devices to the rope began to open spontaneously, despite being properly locked. Most alarming of all, the webbing on his harness started to loosen, as if the buckles were adjusting themselves. Tyler immediately signaled to Michael that they needed to abort the climb and begin their descent. But when Michael attempted to set up a rappel anchor, he discovered that his equipment was experiencing the same inexplicable malfunctions. Carabiners would not stay locked. Protection devices pulled out of solid rock placements, and their ropes became tangled in knots that neither climber had tied. As Tyler and Michael struggled to understand what was happening to their equipment, Tyler noticed movement on the summit ridge above them. At first, he thought he was seeing birds or other wildlife. But as he focused his attention on the area, he realized that the moving shapes were far too large to be animals and were moving in ways that no natural creature could achieve. The figures on the ridge appeared to be humanoid in shape, but were composed of what looked like living shadow. They moved with fluid, impossible grace, gliding across the rocky terrain without appearing to make contact with the ground. Tyler counted at least 6 distinct figures, all of them seeming to move in coordination with each other, as if they were participants in some kind of choreographed dance. What made the sight even more disturbing was Tyler's growing conviction that these shadow figures were aware of his and Michael's presence and were actively observing them. The figures would pause in their movements and orient themselves toward the climber's position, remaining motionless for long periods as if studying the two humans clinging to the rock face below them. Michael, who had been focused on trying to repair their malfunctioning equipment, looked up when Tyler called his attention to the figures on the ridge. Michael's reaction confirmed that Tyler was not experiencing hallucinations or altitude-induced confusion. The shadow figures were visible to both climbers, and their presence filled both men with an overwhelming sense of dread and vulnerability. With their climbing equipment compromised and no safe way to continue either up or down the cliff face, Tyler and Michael found themselves trapped on a narrow ledge approximately 300 feet above the ground and 150 feet below the summit. The ledge was barely wide enough for both men to sit side by side, and there was no natural shelter from the elements. As afternoon turned to evening, the shadow figures on the ridge became more active and appeared to move closer to the edge of the cliff. Tyler and Michael could see them more clearly now, and what they observed convinced them that these entities were not natural phenomena. The figures appeared to be deliberately elongated, with limbs that were too long for their bodies and movements that suggested their joints functioned differently from human anatomy. Tyler described the figures as appearing to be both ancient and timeless, as if they had been part of the mountain landscape for far longer than human civilization had existed in the region. They moved with the confidence of beings that belonged in this environment and viewed the human climbers as intruders in their domain. As darkness fell, Tyler and Michael were forced to spend the night on the exposed ledge, sharing their emergency bivouac gear and trying to stay warm in the rapidly dropping temperatures. The July night, which should have been mild even at their elevation, became brutally cold, with frost forming on the rock and their breath visible in the frigid air. Throughout the night, the presence of the shadow figures became even more pronounced. Tyler and Michael could hear sounds from the ridge above that clearly came from intelligent entities rather than natural phenomena. They heard what sounded like voices speaking in languages neither man recognized, rhythmic chanting that seemed to echo the humming they had heard earlier, and occasionally sounds that resembled laughter. The most terrifying aspect of the night was the growing realization that the shadow figures were not simply observing the trapped climbers, but were actively preventing their escape. Every attempt Tyler and Michael made to repair their equipment or find an alternative route off the ledge was met with increased activity from the entities above, as if they were being warned away from any action that might lead to their departure from the mountain. At one point during the night, Tyler noticed an eerie blue-green glow emanating from a crevice in the rock face near their position. The light pulsed in rhythm with the sounds they were hearing from above, and it seemed to be responding to the movements of the shadow figures. When Michael directed his flashlight toward the source of the glow, the beam was absorbed completely, creating an area of darkness that was somehow deeper and more absolute than the natural darkness of the night. As dawn approached, the activity from the shadow figures gradually decreased, and the unnatural cold that had plagued Tyler and Michael throughout the night began to ease. The frost that had formed on their equipment and clothing melted away as normal mountain temperatures returned. Most importantly, when Tyler tested his climbing gear, he found that it was functioning properly again, as if the malfunctions of the previous day had never occurred. Tyler and Michael wasted no time in beginning their descent from the ledge. But even as they rappelled down the cliff face using equipment that now worked perfectly, both men felt the continuing presence of the shadow figures, watching their every movement. The entities had withdrawn from the visible edge of the ridge, but Tyler was convinced that they were still there, monitoring the climbers' departure from their domain. The descent took nearly 4 hours, as Tyler and Michael moved with extreme caution, testing every anchor point and double-checking every piece of equipment. But they reached the base of the cliff without incident and immediately began the hike back to their vehicle. Neither man spoke about what they had experienced until they were safely off the mountain and back in civilization. Tyler and Michael reported their experience to local climbing authorities and the U.S. Forest Service. But their account was met with skepticism and suggestions that they had experienced altitude sickness, dehydration, or psychological stress. When Tyler insisted that their climbing equipment be examined by experts, the analysis revealed no defects or wear patterns that could explain the malfunctions they had described. Some investigators suggested that electromagnetic interference from unknown sources might have affected metal components of their gear, but no evidence of such interference was detected in the area of Devil's Backbone. Others proposed that psychological factors related to the isolation and stress of technical climbing might have caused the climbers to misperceive normal equipment failures as supernatural phenomena. But Tyler and Michael maintained that what they had experienced was real, and that the shadow figures they had observed were intelligent entities that considered the mountain to be their protected territory. Tyler began researching the folklore and oral traditions associated with the Cumberland Plateau, and discovered that the area had a long history of encounters with what local Cherokee traditions described as mountain spirits or guardians. According to these traditional accounts, certain peaks and cliff faces in the region were considered sacred sites that were protected by ancient entities. These guardians were said to appear to humans who ventured too deeply into their territory, particularly those who showed disrespect for the natural environment or who attempted to conquer the mountains through technological means rather than spiritual understanding. Tyler has never returned to Devil's Backbone, and he now approaches all of his climbing expeditions with a deeper appreciation for the possibility that some places in the wilderness are protected by forces that operate beyond human comprehension. He advises other climbers to be aware of the spiritual as well as physical challenges that may be encountered in the deep mountains, and to show appropriate respect for the ancient powers that may still inhabit these remote places. The experience at Devil's Backbone changed Tyler's entire perspective on mountaineering and his relationship with the natural world. He now views his climbing activities as opportunities for communion with the mountains rather than conquest of them, and he approaches each expedition with humility and reverence for the possibility that he may be entering sacred space that is guarded by entities far older and more powerful than human civilization. This story comes from Professor Amanda Volkoff from the University of Georgia, a respected academic who has dedicated her career to studying folklore and cultural anthropology in the southeastern United States. What began as a routine university-sponsored research expedition into Appalachian legends became something that fundamentally challenged her understanding of the boundary between academic study and lived reality. Professor Volkoff had spent the better part of a decade researching the oral traditions of rural Appalachian communities, focusing particularly on stories of supernatural entities and shape-shifting creatures that had been passed down through generations. Her work was well regarded in academic circles, and she had published several papers on the cultural significance of these legends in maintaining community identity and traditional belief systems. In early 2023, Amanda received approval from her university to conduct an extensive field research project that would take her deep into the remote mountain communities of northern Georgia, eastern Tennessee, and western North Carolina. The project was funded by a substantial grant that allowed her to assemble a small team of graduate students and research assistants, and it was intended to be the foundation for a comprehensive book on Appalachian folklore. Amanda's research team consisted of herself and 3 graduate students. Jennifer Walsh, who was working on her master's thesis in anthropology, David Chen, a doctoral candidate in folklore studies, and Sarah Mitchell, who was pursuing a degree in cultural geography. The team was well equipped with recording equipment, cameras, GPS devices, and camping gear for extended stays in remote areas. The team established their base of operations in the small town of Whistle Creek, Georgia, located in the foothills of the Chattahoochee National Forest. Whistle Creek was chosen specifically because it had maintained strong connections to traditional Appalachian culture, and because several of Amanda's academic contacts had indicated that the residents were generally willing to share their stories with respectful outsiders. Amanda's initial interviews with local residents proceeded exactly as she had expected, based on her previous research experience. The older members of the community were particularly knowledgeable about traditional stories and were eager to share accounts that had been passed down through their families for generations. Many of these stories centered around creatures that could assume both human and animal forms, entities that were both feared and respected in the local folklore. But as Amanda delved deeper into these stories, she began to encounter a pattern that troubled her from an academic perspective. The most knowledgeable informants, particularly the elderly women who served as the primary keepers of oral tradition in the community, would become evasive or even hostile when she pressed for specific details about certain creatures or locations. One elderly woman, whom Amanda refers to only as Mrs. Henderson out of respect for her privacy, became particularly agitated when Amanda asked about skinwalkers and their relationship to specific geographic locations in the area. Mrs. Henderson warned Amanda that some stories were not meant to be told to outsiders and that academic curiosity could lead to consequences that no university training could prepare her for. Despite these warnings, Amanda felt compelled to pursue her research with the thoroughness that her academic training demanded. She believed that documenting these stories in their complete form was essential for preserving an important part of Appalachian cultural heritage, and she was convinced that approaching the subject matter with scholarly objectivity would protect her team from any negative consequences that local superstitions might suggest. It was this conviction that led Amanda to make what she now considers the greatest mistake of her academic career. During her 3rd week in Whistle Creek, several informants had made vague references to an area in the nearby forest that was connected to skinwalker stories, but that none of them would identify specifically. Amanda became determined to locate this site, believing that finding and documenting it would provide crucial evidence for her research. Against the explicit advice of her local contacts, Amanda organized an expedition into the forest with 2 of her graduate students, Jennifer and David. Using topographical maps and GPS coordinates derived from oblique references in her interviews, the team set out to locate what they theorized might be a site of traditional spiritual significance. The forest expedition began normally enough. Amanda and her students followed established trails for the first several hours, documenting their route and taking photographs of various landmarks. But as they moved deeper into the forest, following increasingly faint paths that seemed to lead away from any officially maintained trail system, the environment around them began to change in ways that Amanda initially attributed to the natural characteristics of old-growth forest. The canopy became thicker and darker, blocking out most of the daylight even though it was early afternoon. The sounds of birds and small animals, which had been constant during the early part of their hike, gradually faded until the forest was completely silent except for the sound of their own footsteps. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and Amanda noticed that none of them was sweating despite the physical exertion of hiking uphill through dense undergrowth. After approximately 4 hours of hiking, Amanda's team discovered what appeared to be the site they had been searching for. They emerged into a circular clearing that was completely unlike the surrounding forest. The trees at the edge of the clearing were twisted and gnarled in ways that Amanda had never seen before. Their bark scarred with what looked like deliberate markings rather than natural damage from weather or animals. The floor of the clearing was bare earth, completely devoid of the leaf litter, fallen branches, and undergrowth that covered the forest floor everywhere else in the area. The soil appeared to have been disturbed recently, showing patterns that looked almost like symbols or geometric designs. But Amanda could not determine what might have created these markings. As Amanda and her students began to document the clearing with photographs and detailed notes, they discovered clear evidence that they were not the first people to visit this location recently. Fresh footprints were visible in the disturbed soil. But these prints were unlike anything Amanda had encountered in her years of wilderness research. They appeared to be human in basic shape, but were elongated and showed claw-like marks at the tips of what should have been toes. The footprints followed a pattern that led from the edge of the clearing to a formation of large rocks covered with moss and lichen. As Amanda's team approached these rocks to investigate further, they began to hear sounds from the surrounding forest that made it clear they were no longer alone in this remote location. The sounds were unlike anything Amanda had heard in decades of wilderness research. They included low, guttural vocalizations that seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously, clicking noises that suggested some kind of communication between unseen entities, and occasional howls that were far too deep and resonant to come from any known species of wolf or coyote. Amanda later described the experience of hearing these sounds as profoundly unsettling in ways that went beyond simple fear of wild animals. The sounds seemed to be deliberately directed at the research team, as if the unseen entities producing them were aware of the humans' presence and were responding to their intrusion into the clearing. As the sounds from the forest intensified, Amanda made the decision to retreat from the clearing and return to their base camp. But as the team packed their equipment and prepared to leave, Amanda noticed that the forest around them had changed. The paths they had followed to reach the clearing were no longer visible, and their GPS devices were providing contradictory readings that made navigation impossible. The team spent nearly 2 hours trying to find their way out of the forest before finally locating a trail that led back toward Whistle Creek. But during this disorienting period, they experienced phenomena that convinced Amanda that their academic research had crossed a line into something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. David reported seeing shadowy figures moving between the trees, figures that seemed to be following the team's movements, but always stayed just outside of clear visual range. Jennifer's camera began malfunctioning, taking pictures automatically and producing images that showed strange light anomalies and dark shapes that were not visible to the naked eye. Amanda herself experienced the overwhelming sensation of being watched by multiple entities that were capable of moving through the forest with complete silence despite their apparent size. When the team finally returned to their base camp in Whistle Creek, they discovered that several hours had passed beyond what their documented hiking time should have accounted for. According to their watches and the daylight, they had been in the forest for over 8 hours, but their detailed logs showed only 4 hours of actual hiking and research time. That night, Amanda was awakened by sounds outside her tent that she initially assumed were produced by local wildlife. But when she looked outside, she saw a tall, humanoid figure standing at the edge of their campsite, silhouetted against the moonlight. The figure appeared to be watching the tent where Amanda and her students were sleeping, and it remained motionless for several minutes before disappearing into the darkness. Over the following days, Amanda's research expedition was plagued by increasingly frequent and disturbing encounters with entities that seemed to be monitoring their activities. Team members reported seeing shadowy figures during both daylight and nighttime hours. Electronic equipment continued to malfunction in ways that could not be explained by technical problems. And all 4 members of the research team experienced vivid dreams that seemed to be connected to their discovery of the clearing in the forest. The most significant encounter occurred during Amanda's final week in Whistle Creek, when she decided to take a solo evening walk to reflect on the research she had gathered and plan her team's departure from the area. As she walked along a trail near their campsite, Amanda came face to face with an entity that she could only describe as a skinwalker in the exact sense that her informants had described. The creature appeared to be simultaneously human and animal, with features that shifted and changed as Amanda observed it. At times, it looked like a tall, thin human figure, but its proportions were wrong, and its movement suggested that its joints functioned differently from normal human anatomy. At other times, it appeared more wolf-like, with fur and elongated limbs, but it maintained an upright posture and displayed obvious intelligence in its behavior. The entity stood approximately 20 feet from Amanda on the trail, making no aggressive moves, but clearly studying her with the same scientific curiosity that she had brought to her research into its existence. Amanda later described the encounter as lasting for several minutes, during which she felt no immediate physical threat, but experienced an overwhelming sense that she was being evaluated by something far older and more powerful than human civilization. The skinwalker eventually moved off the trail and disappeared into the forest, but not before Amanda gained the distinct impression that it had deliberately allowed her to see it, and that the encounter was intended as some kind of message or warning related to her research activities. Amanda concluded her research expedition the following day and returned to the university with extensive documentation of local folklore, but also with a fundamentally changed understanding of the relationship between academic study and traditional knowledge. Her experience had convinced her that some subjects of anthropological research are not simply cultural artifacts to be documented and analyzed, but are living realities that must be approached with respect and humility. Professor Volkov has continued her research into Appalachian folklore, but she now approaches her work with a deep appreciation for the warnings and boundaries that traditional knowledge keepers have maintained for generations. She advises other researchers who work in similar areas to recognize that academic curiosity, while valuable, must be balanced with respect for the wisdom of the communities they study, and an understanding that some knowledge comes with responsibilities that extend beyond scholarly publication. Amanda's experience serves as a reminder that the line between folklore and reality may be far thinner than academic training typically acknowledges, and that researchers who venture into the deep places of traditional knowledge must be prepared to encounter truths that challenge the fundamental assumptions of modern scholarship. This final story comes from Jesse Crawford, a third-generation resident of the Tennessee mountains whose family has deep roots in the region's complex history with illegal whiskey production. Jesse shared with us an account that reveals how the sins of the past can reach across decades to claim payment from those who dare to walk in the footsteps of their ancestors. Jesse's great-grandfather, Elijah Crawford, had been one of the most successful moonshine runners in eastern Tennessee during the Prohibition era of the 1920s and early 1930s. Elijah operated an extensive network of hidden stills deep in the Smoky Mountains and used secret trails known only to a select few to transport his product to buyers in towns throughout the region. The Crawford family's illegal operation had made them wealthy by local standards, but it had also made them enemies of both federal agents and rival bootleggers. According to family stories that Jesse had heard throughout his childhood, Elijah Crawford's success had not been achieved through luck or superior whiskey alone. The old-timers in the family spoke in whispers about deals Elijah had made with entities in the deep woods, agreements that protected his stills and his runners from discovery by law enforcement. But that came with prices that would not be fully understood until generations later. Jesse had always dismissed these stories as colorful family folklore, the kind of supernatural embellishments that often grew around figures who had achieved legendary status in their communities. But in the fall of 2023, financial pressures led Jesse to make a decision that would force him to confront the possibility that his great-grandfather's legacy involved more than just illegal whiskey. Jesse had been struggling to maintain the family property, a substantial tract of forested land that had been in the Crawford family for over a century. Rising property taxes and medical expenses for his aging parents had put Jesse in a desperate financial situation. And he was facing the possibility of having to sell land that represented his family's entire heritage in the Tennessee mountains. It was during this period of financial stress that Jesse remembered something his grandfather had told him years earlier about hidden caches of valuable items that Elijah Crawford had supposedly buried throughout the family property. According to his grandfather, Elijah had not trusted banks with his bootlegging profits and had instead hidden gold coins, silver, and other valuables in locations known only to the Crawford family. Jesse's grandfather had provided him with a hand-drawn map that supposedly showed the locations of several of these hidden caches, along with cryptic directions for following the same secret trails that Elijah had used to move his moonshine without detection. Jesse's grandfather had warned him that the trails were dangerous and that some parts of the family property were better left undisturbed. But he had never provided specific details about what those dangers might be. Driven by desperation and skepticism about his grandfather's warnings, Jesse decided to use the map to search for the hidden caches. The map showed a complex network of trails that connected various points throughout the Crawford property. Trails that were not visible on any modern topographical maps, and that Jesse had never encountered during his many years of hunting and hiking on the family land. On a cold November morning, Jesse set out with metal detector, digging tools and camping gear to follow his great-grandfather's secret routes and search for the buried treasure that might save his family's property. The map indicated that the largest cache was located at the end of a trail that led deep into the most remote section of the Crawford land, an area that Jesse had always avoided because of its difficult terrain and dense forest coverage. Following the cryptic directions on his grandfather's map, Jesse located what appeared to be the beginning of Elijah's hidden trail system. The trail was barely visible, overgrown after decades of disuse, but it followed a logical route through the forest that avoided open areas where moonshine runners might have been spotted by law enforcement or rival bootleggers. As Jesse followed the trail deeper into the forest, he began to understand why his great-grandfather's operation had been so successful. The route was ingeniously designed to take advantage of natural features that provided concealment and multiple escape routes. Hidden caches along the trail contained the remains of supply depots where runners could rest and resupply during long journeys through the mountains. But as Jesse moved further along the trail, he began to encounter evidence that suggested his great-grandfather's success might have involved more than just clever route planning and knowledge of the terrain. At several points along the trail, Jesse discovered stone cairns and carved symbols that appeared to be much older than the Prohibition era. These markers seemed to follow patterns that suggested they were part of some kind of spiritual or ritualistic system rather than simple navigation aids. The most unsettling discovery came when Jesse reached a clearing that his map marked as the location of the largest cache. The clearing was dominated by an ancient oak tree that must have been centuries old. And carved into the trunk of this tree were symbols that Jesse recognized from Cherokee petroglyphs he had seen in museums. But mixed with these traditional markings were other symbols that appeared to have been carved more recently, possibly during his great-grandfather's era. As Jesse used his metal detector to search the area around the oak tree, he began to hear sounds from the surrounding forest that reminded him of stories his grandfather had told about the supernatural aspects of Elijah's moonshine operation. The sounds included low humming that seemed to come from multiple directions, whispered voices speaking in languages Jesse did not recognize, and the occasional sound of footsteps moving through the forest in patterns that suggested multiple entities circling the clearing. Jesse's metal detector began to produce erratic readings, indicating the presence of buried metal objects, but providing inconsistent information about their location and depth. As he dug in the areas where the strongest signals were detected, Jesse discovered not the gold and silver he had expected to find, but rather a collection of artifacts that suggested his great-grandfather's relationship with the supernatural forces of the forest had been far more complex than family stories had indicated. The buried items included carved wooden tokens bearing symbols that matched those on the oak tree, metal amulets that appeared to be made of silver and iron, and a leather-bound journal written in Elijah Crawford's distinctive handwriting. As Jesse read through his great-grandfather's journal, he discovered detailed accounts of negotiations with entities that Elijah described as the guardians of the mountain, agreements that granted protection for his moonshine operation in exchange for payments that would be collected from future generations of the Crawford family. According to the journal, Elijah had encountered these entities during his early attempts to establish stills in the deep forest, and they had offered him a bargain that would ensure his success but would bind his descendants to ongoing obligations. The journal described ceremonies that Elijah had participated in, offerings he had made, and warnings he had received about the consequences of failing to honor the agreements he had made. As Jesse read these disturbing revelations about his family's history, the sounds from the forest intensified, and he became aware that he was no longer alone in the clearing. Tall, shadowy figures began to emerge from the tree line, figures that moved with the same fluid grace that other witnesses had described in their encounters with supernatural entities in the Appalachian wilderness. The figures approached Jesse slowly and deliberately, and he understood instinctively that they were the same guardians his great-grandfather had written about in his journal. They had been waiting for decades for a Crawford descendant to return to the clearing and acknowledge the obligations that Elijah had incurred on behalf of his family. Jesse's encounter with these entities lasted for several hours, during which he experienced what he can only describe as a direct communication with intelligences that were far older and more powerful than human civilization. The Guardians explained to Jesse that his great-grandfather's success had come at a price that was now due, and that the Crawford family's continued prosperity and protection depended on Jesse's willingness to honor the agreements that Elijah had made. Jesse returned from the forest that day with a profound understanding of his family's true legacy and the responsibilities that came with it. He found no gold or silver caches that could solve his immediate financial problems, but he discovered something far more valuable and far more dangerous: knowledge of his family's ongoing relationship with the supernatural guardians of the Tennessee mountains. Jesse has never spoken publicly about the specific details of his encounter with the mountain guardians or the obligations he accepted on behalf of his family. But he was able to resolve his financial difficulties through means he describes only as traditional arrangements that honor old agreements. And the Crawford family property remains in family hands. Jesse now serves as a keeper of his family's true history and warns others who might be tempted to explore the abandoned moonshine trails that some paths through the mountains lead to destinations that demand payment in forms that money cannot provide. The legacy of the Prohibition era, he says, includes debts that span generations and agreements that bind families to obligations that most people would never understand. The Moonshine Runner's route remains hidden in the Tennessee mountains. But Jesse Crawford's experience serves as a reminder that the past is never truly buried, and that some family secrets come with responsibilities that extend far beyond the memories of those who created them.